The bitter cold of the Wyoming winter night pierced through Nora's threadbare coat as she huddled beside the railroad tracks, her body trembling uncontrollably. The year was 1879, and at 22 she had nothing but the small bundle of possessions clutched to her chest and the fading hope of a better life somewhere anywhere else. Her eyelids grew heavy as snowflakes began to fall, each one a tiny dagger against her pale skin. Perhaps, she thought distantly, it wouldn't be so terrible to sleep just for a little while. Miss, a deep voice cut through the howling wind. You'll freeze to death out here. You'll sleep somewhere warm tonight. Nora's eyes fluttered open to see a tall figure on horseback, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The stranger dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. "I'm fine," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "Just resting." The man crouched beside her, and she could now see his face weathered from sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer sky. A thick mustache covered his upper lip, but it couldn't hide the concern etched across his features. "Name's Colton Reed," he said, removing his glove to press the back of his hand against her cheek. "You're half frozen, miss. My ranch is just 3 miles from here. I can't leave you to die in this cold." "Nora Blackwood," she replied, her teeth chattering. "And I'm not your responsibility, Mr. Reed." Colton's expression hardened. "Maybe not, but I'll be damned if I ride away and leave a woman to freeze to death. Now you can come willingly, or I can throw you over my saddle. Your choice." Nora wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't need charity from strangers, but the cold had seeped into her bones, making even the smallest movement painful. With resignation, she nodded. "Good choice," Colton said, his voice softening. He helped her to her feet, surprised by how light she felt as he lifted her onto his horse. Climbing up behind her, he wrapped his heavy coat around them both and urged his horse forward. Nora fought to stay conscious as they rode through the snow-covered landscape. The warmth of the man behind her was both comforting and unsettling. She hadn't been this close to another person in months, not since. "Stay with me, Miss Blackwood," Colton said, his breath warm against her ear. "We're almost there." Through the swirling snow, a light appeared, a lantern hanging from a post. As they drew closer, Nora could make out the silhouette of a modest ranch house, smoke curling from its chimney. "Welcome to Wildwood Ranch," Colton said as he guided his horse into the barn. "It ain't much, but it's home." He dismounted first, then reached up to help Nora down. Her legs buckled beneath her, and Colton caught her before she hit the ground, lifting her into his arms without hesitation. "I can walk," she protested weakly. "Sure you can," he replied, his tone making it clear he didn't believe her. "But humor me." The warmth of the house hit Nora like a physical force as Colton pushed open the door. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the simple but tidy main room. "Martha," Colton called out, "we've got company." An older woman emerged from what Nora assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a perpetual expression of slight worry. "Land's sake, Colton, who've you brought home now?" Martha's eyes widened as she took in Nora's disheveled appearance. "Poor thing's half dead from cold. Bring her by the fire, quick." Before Nora could protest, she found herself being settled into a chair near the hearth, a thick woolen blanket draped around her shoulders. The older woman pressed a mug of something hot into her hands. "Drink up, dear, it's just broth, but it'll warm you from the inside." Nora took a tentative sip, nearly moaning as the warm liquid coursed down her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. Martha tutted. "No need for thanks. Any decent person would do the same." She turned to Colton, who stood watching with his hat in his hands. "Where'd you find her?" "By the railroad tracks, about 3 miles east," he replied, his eyes never leaving Nora, nearly buried in snow. "I was just resting," Nora said defensively. "I would have moved on." Martha and Colton exchanged a knowing glance. They both recognized the lie for what it was. "Well, you're here now," Martha said firmly, "and you'll stay until you're proper recovered. I won't hear arguments on the matter." Nora wanted to object, to insist she couldn't impose, but the warmth of the fire and the broth had unleashed a wave of exhaustion so powerful she could barely keep her eyes open. "The guest room's made up," Martha told Colton. Once she's finished that broth, she needs sleep more than anything. Colton nodded, then addressed Nora. Miss Blackwood, Martha's my housekeeper. Been with me since I inherited this place from my pa 5 years ago. You can trust her and me, though I reckon you've got little reason to trust anyone right now. Nora stared into her mug, avoiding his piercing gaze. I appreciate the kindness, but I'll be moving on tomorrow. We'll talk about that after you've rested, Martha said in a tone that brooked no argument. Now finish that broth. Nora did as she was told, too tired to resist. When the mug was empty, Colton helped her to her feet and guided her to a small but clean bedroom. A patchwork quilt covered the bed and a lamp burned low on the bedside table. There's a nightgown there, Colton said, pointing to a folded garment on the bed. It belonged to my sister before she married and moved to Denver. Should fit well enough. You're very kind, Mr. Reed, Nora said quietly. Colton shook his head. Not kindness, Miss Blackwood, just common decency. He paused at the door. Rest well, we'll talk in the morning. After he left, Nora changed into the nightgown, her fingers clumsy with lingering cold and fatigue. The garment was soft from many washings and slightly too large, but it was the cleanest thing she'd worn in weeks. She crawled beneath the quilt, sinking into the feather mattress with a sigh. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. The events of the past month replayed in her mind the fire that had taken her parents' home and their lives, the discovery that her father's debts exceeded their assets, leaving her penniless. The journey west with what little money she could scrape together, seeking a cousin in Sacramento who might take her in. The theft of her purse in Cheyenne, leaving her stranded with nothing but the clothes on her back and a locket containing her parents' portraits. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, soaking into the pillow. How had she come to this? Accepting charity from strangers with no plan beyond surviving another day. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and Nora fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, Nora was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up abruptly. A clean dress had been laid across the foot of the bed, simple blue calico, probably another of Colton's sister's garments. Beside it sat a basin of water, still warm, with a cloth and a sliver of soap. Nora washed and dressed quickly, feeling human again for the first time in days. She found a hairbrush on the dresser and worked the tangles from her long chestnut hair before braiding it loosely. The smell of coffee and bacon drew her from the room. She followed the scent to the kitchen, where Martha stood at the stove, flipping pancakes in a cast iron skillet. Colton sat at the table, a cup of coffee in front of him, reading a week-old newspaper. He looked up as she entered, his eyes widening slightly. Good morning, Miss Blackwood. You're looking considerably more alive today. Good morning, Nora replied, suddenly self-conscious. Thank you again for your hospitality. Sit down, child, Martha ordered, gesturing to the table. You need feeding up. You're thin as a rail. Nora obeyed, settling into a chair across from Colton. Martha placed a plate heaped with pancakes, bacon, and scrambled eggs before her. Eat, the older woman commanded. And don't you dare say it's too much. Nora hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite touched her lips. She ate with as much dignity as she could muster, but it was a struggle not to devour the food like a starving animal. Colton watched her over the rim of his coffee cup, his expression unreadable. When she'd eaten her fill, he finally spoke. So, Miss Blackwood, where are you headed? Nora dabbed at her mouth with a napkin. Sacramento, I have a cousin there. That's quite a journey, Colton observed. Especially for a woman traveling alone. I had little choice in the matter, Nora replied stiffly. Colton nodded. I don't mean to pry, but might I ask what circumstances led you to be sleeping beside the railroad tracks in the dead of winter? Nora hesitated. These people had shown her nothing but kindness, yet she was reluctant to share her misfortunes. Pride, her father had always said, would be her downfall. My parents died in a fire, she finally said, her voice flat. Our home and business, a small bookshop, were destroyed. After settling my father's debts, there was nothing left. My cousin Catherine is my only living relative. Martha clicked her tongue sympathetically. You poor dear, such a terrible thing to endure. And how did you end up in Wyoming? Colton pressed. Sacramento's a far piece from here. I was in Cheyenne, Nora explained. Someone stole my purse while I was waiting for a westbound train. I've been making my way on foot since then, working where I can for food and shelter. Colton's jaw tightened. That explains a few things. He exchanged a glance with Martha. Miss Blackwood, I have a proposition for you. Nora tensed. She'd heard propositions before during her journey west. None had been respectable. Sensing her discomfort, Colton raised his hands. Nothing improper, I assure you. Martha here isn't as young as she once was, and the winter's hard on her joints. I've been thinking of hiring someone to help with the household duties. Room, board, and a modest wage, just until spring when travel would be safer for you. Nora's pride warred with practicality. She had no money, no prospects, and winter was deepening. The alternative was to continue her journey on foot through snow and ice, likely to end in death. I wouldn't want to impose, she said weakly. Martha snorted. It's not imposing if you're working, girl, and Lord knows I could use the help. This place is too much for these old bones, especially with Colton tracking mud and dust everywhere he goes. Colton grinned. I'm not that bad. You're worse, Martha retorted, but there was affection in her voice. Nora looked between them, these strangers who were offering her a lifeline. I can cook and clean. I'm good with numbers, too. My father taught me to keep the bookshop accounts. That settles it then, Colton said, rising from the table. You'll stay until spring, help Martha, and earn enough for your train ticket to Sacramento. He extended his hand. Do we have a deal, Miss Blackwood? After a moment's hesitation, Nora placed her hand in his. We have a deal, Mr. Reed. His hand was warm and calloused, enveloping hers completely. A strange flutter stirred in her chest, but she dismissed it as gratitude, nothing more. Colton released her hand and reached for his hat. I've got work to attend to. Martha will show you around. He paused at the door. Welcome to Wildwood, Miss Blackwood. After he left, Martha began clearing the table. He's a good man, Colton Reed, one of the best I know. You've known him long. Nora asked, rising to help with the dishes. Since he was born, Martha replied. I worked for his parents for 30 years, watched him grow from a squalling babe to the man he is now. She handed Nora a dish towel. He's had his share of troubles, that boy. Lost his ma to consumption when he was 12. His pa followed 5 years ago thrown from a horse. His sister Abigail married a banker and moved to Denver 2 years past. So it's just the two of you here? Nora asked, drying a plate. And the ranch hands, Martha said. 5 of them, though they bunk in the bunkhouse out back. Good boys, all of them, though they eat like locusts. She gave Nora an appraising look. You'll meet them at supper. They usually take their midday meal out on the range. As they worked, Martha explained the routine of the ranch. Breakfast at sunrise, dinner at noon for those in the house, supper at sunset for everyone. Colton handled the cattle business with his foreman, Michael, while Martha managed the household. The men need clean clothes, hot meals, and occasional patching up when they do something foolish, Martha said. Which is frequently, you'll help me with the cooking, cleaning, mending, and such. Colton keeps a small vegetable garden in summer, and we preserve what we can for winter. There's chickens for eggs, a milk cow, and a smokehouse out back. It was a far cry from the bookshop where Nora had spent most of her life, surrounded by the smell of paper and ink rather than livestock and wood smoke. Yet there was something appealing about the simplicity of it all. I'll do my best, Nora promised. Martha patted her hand. That's all anyone can ask, dear. The days fell into a rhythm. Nora rose before dawn to help Martha prepare breakfast for Colton and any hands who came to the main house to eat. Afterward, they tackled the endless chores that keeping a ranch house entailed: washing, ironing, mending, baking, churning butter, preserving food, feeding chickens. At first, Nora's city-bred hands blistered and cracked from the unaccustomed labor, but Martha showed her how to soothe them with a salve of beeswax and herbs. Gradually, her hands toughened and her body grew stronger. She saw little of Colton during daylight hours. He left after breakfast and often didn't return until supper, sometimes later if there was trouble with the cattle or fences needed mending. When their paths did cross, He was unfailingly polite, but maintained a certain distance that Nora found both puzzling and, oddly, disappointing. The ranch hands were a diverse group. Michael, the foreman, was a former cavalry officer with a ramrod-straight posture and a no-nonsense attitude. Jasper was barely 20, eager to please and clumsy as a newborn colt. William and Thomas were brothers from Tennessee, taciturn but reliable. And there was Diego, a Mexican vaquero, whose skill with horses was legendary in the territory. They treated Nora with a mixture of curiosity and respect, tipping their hats when they saw her and thanking her profusely for the meals she helped prepare. It was Diego who first made her laugh, telling outrageous stories about his adventures while she served him seconds at supper one evening. "Miss Nora," he'd said, his accent thick but his English clear, "your biscuits are better than my grandmother's, and if you tell her I said so, I will call you a liar to your face." The table had erupted in laughter, and Nora had found herself joining in, the sound strange to her own ears after so long. Colton had watched her from the head of the table, a curious expression on his face. When their eyes met, he'd quickly looked away, focusing on his plate with sudden intensity. That night, as Nora prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of Colton Reed more than she should. There was something compelling about him, not just his physical presence, though that was undeniable. It was the way he treated his men with respect, the gentleness he showed to the animals, the quiet authority he wielded without raising his voice. She shook her head, dismissing such thoughts. Come spring, she would be gone, continuing her journey to Sacramento. Developing any sort of attachment would be foolish. Yet as January gave way to February, Nora found herself watching for Colton, looking forward to the evenings when he would sit by the fire after supper, sometimes reading aloud from a book or newspaper for everyone's benefit. His deep voice would fill the room, and Nora would lose herself in the words and the moment, forgetting for a time that this wasn't her home, that these weren't her people. One evening in mid-February, Nora was in the kitchen preparing vegetables for the next day's stew when Colton entered unexpectedly. "Miss Blackwood," he said, startling her, "I apologize for interrupting." "Not at all, Mr. Reed," she replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Did you need something?" He shifted from one foot to the other, uncharacteristically hesitant. There's a social at the church in town this Saturday, dancing, food, that sort of thing. The whole county turns out for it." He cleared his throat. "I wondered if you might like to attend, with me, that is." "And Martha, of course." Nora stared at him, surprised by the invitation. "A social?" "Yes," Colton said, his confidence returning. "It's a chance for folks to gather during the winter months when travel between homesteads is difficult. Good for morale, Pastor Williams says." "I don't have anything suitable to wear," Nora admitted, embarrassed. Colton waved this concern away. "Martha's a wizard with a needle. I'm sure between her skills and Abigail's left-behind dresses, something could be arranged." He looked at her hopefully. "So, will you come?" The eager expression on his face made something warm unfurl in Nora's chest. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I'd like that very much." The smile that broke across Colton's face was like the sun emerging from behind clouds. "Excellent, I'll let Martha know." He hesitated, then added, "I'm glad you're coming, Miss Blackwood." After he left, Nora leaned against the kitchen counter, her heart racing inexplicably. It was just a social gathering, she told herself, not a courtship or anything resembling one. Yet she couldn't deny the flutter of excitement at the prospect of an evening away from the ranch, in Colton's company. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparation. Martha, delighted by the prospect of the social, threw herself into transforming one of Abigail's dresses for Nora. The gown in question was a deep green silk that Martha declared would bring out the gold in your eyes, dear. Nora protested that it was too fine for someone in her position, but Martha wouldn't hear of it. "Nonsense," the older woman declared. "Every woman deserves to feel beautiful now and then. Besides, it's been gathering dust in that trunk for 2 years. Abigail would be pleased to see it worn." On the day of the social, Martha insisted Nora take a proper bath with heated water and the lavender soap she saved for special occasions. Afterward, she helped Nora dress and arranged her hair in an elegant updo, securing it with tortoiseshell combs that had belonged to Colton's mother. "There," Martha said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "You look lovely, child." Nora hardly recognized the woman in the small mirror. The green dress, altered to fit her perfectly, emphasized her slender waist and the elegant line of her shoulders. Her hair, usually confined to a practical braid, shone in the lamplight, and her eyes seemed larger, more luminous. "Thank you, Martha," she whispered, touched by the older woman's kindness. "Pshaw," Martha replied, but she looked pleased. "Now let's go show Colton. He's been pacing the parlor for half an hour." Colton was indeed waiting, dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, his usual cowboy hat replaced by a sleek bowler. He turned as they entered, and Nora watched as his expression shifted from polite interest to stunned appreciation. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his voice slightly hoarse, "you look magnificent." Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Reed, you look very handsome yourself." Martha bustled around them, gathering shawls and cloaks. Yes, you both look fine." "Now can we get going before the snow starts again?" The journey to town was magical. Colton had hitched his best horses to a sleigh, complete with bells that jingled merrily as they glided over the snow. Thick blankets kept the cold at bay, and the stars overhead seemed close enough to touch. Nora sat between Colton and Martha, acutely aware of Colton's solid presence beside her. Occasionally, when the sleigh hit a bump, their shoulders would touch, sending a jolt of awareness through her that had nothing to do with the cold. The church was transformed when they arrived. Lanterns hung from every available surface, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a small group of musicians played lively tunes in the corner. The center of the room had been cleared for dancing, and several couples were already twirling about. "Colton Reed, as I live and breathe." A plump woman in a purple dress descended upon them as soon as they entered. "We'd about given up on seeing you this year." "Mrs. Peterson," Colton said, tipping his hat, "you know I wouldn't miss your famous apple pie." The woman beamed, then turned curious eyes to Nora. "And who might this lovely young lady be?" "Nora Blackwood," Colton introduced her. "She's helping Martha at the ranch this winter." "Miss Blackwood, this is Mrs. Peterson, the finest baker in 3 counties and the wife of our town's mayor." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Peterson," Nora said, extending her hand. Mrs. Peterson clasped it warmly. "The pleasure is mine, dear, and don't you look lovely in that green? It suits you beautifully." Before Nora could respond, they were surrounded by a swarm of townsfolk, all curious about the newcomer. Colton introduced her to so many people that their names and faces began to blur together. Everyone was welcoming, though Nora noticed several young women eyeing her with speculative looks when they saw her with Colton. "Don't mind them," Martha whispered when she caught Nora observing this. "Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for Colton since he inherited the ranch. None have succeeded in catching his eye." This information shouldn't have pleased Nora as much as it did. After the initial flurry of introductions, Colton guided Nora to the refreshment table, loading a plate with samples of everything for her to try. "Mrs. Peterson's apple pie really is legendary," he told her, "and Miss Abernathy's lemon cookies won a ribbon at the territorial fair last year." They found a quiet corner to enjoy the food, watching the dancers. Nora found herself relaxing, drawn into conversation with Colton about the town and its inhabitants. He was an engaging storyteller, painting vivid pictures of local characters and their peculiarities. "And that gentleman there," he said, nodding toward a distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples, "is Dr. Morley. Finest physician west of the Mississippi, according to him, delivered half the babies in the county, including me." "He looks very dignified," Nora observed. Colton chuckled. "He is now, but Martha tells me he fainted dead away when my sister was born, hit his head on the bedpost, and had to be revived with smelling salts." Nora laughed, the sound bright in the noisy room. Colton watched her, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You should laugh more often, Miss Blackwood," he said softly. "It suits you." Before Nora could respond, the music changed to a waltz. Colton set aside his plate and stood, extending his hand to her. "Would you do me the honor of this dance?" Nora hesitated. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced." "Neither am I," Colton admitted. "We'll muddle through together." She placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her to the dance floor. His arm encircled her waist, holding her at a respectable distance, but close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and the faint hint of leather that seemed to cling to him. They began to move, a bit awkwardly at first. Nora was acutely aware of the eyes on them, the whispers that followed. But as they found their rhythm, the rest of the room seemed to fade away until there was only the music and Colton, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "You're doing splendidly," he murmured. "Only because you're leading so well," she replied. He smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. "We make a good team, Miss Blackwood." The waltz ended too soon, replaced by a livelier reel that had couples forming lines. Colton guided Nora through this dance as well, and several more after it. By the time they took a break, her cheeks were flushed with exertion and pleasure. "I need some air," she confessed, fanning herself with her hand. Colton nodded. "Let me get your cloak." They stepped outside into the crisp February night. The snow had stopped, and the sky was a canopy of stars, so bright and numerous they seemed to pulse with life. "It's beautiful," Nora breathed, tilting her head back to take in the view. "Yes," Colton agreed, though when she glanced at him, he wasn't looking at the stars. He was looking at her. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of the attraction that had been building since the night he found her by the railroad tracks. "Miss Blackwood, Nora," Colton began, his voice low, "I know you plan to leave when spring comes, and I've respected that, but I find myself—" He paused, searching for words. "I find myself hoping you might consider staying." Nora's heart skipped a beat. "Staying at Wildwood." Colton nodded, his expression earnest in the starlight. "Martha adores you, the men respect you, and I—" He took a deep breath. "I've grown very fond of you, Nora, more than fond. I know it's sudden and perhaps unwelcome, but I had to speak before more time passed." Nora was speechless. In the month since her parents' deaths, she'd been so focused on survival that the possibility of happiness of love had seemed as distant as the stars above them. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. Colton's expression softened. "You don't have to say anything now, just think about it, about staying, about giving whatever this is between us a chance to grow." He gestured to the town around them. "This could be your home if you wanted it to be." Before Nora could respond, the church door opened, spilling light and music into the night. Martha stood there, a knowing smile on her face. "There you two are. They're about to serve the midnight supper, and Mrs. Peterson is looking for you, Colton. Something about judging a pie contest." Colton sighed, but his eyes remained on Nora. "We'll be right in, Martha." After Martha disappeared back inside, Colton offered Nora his arm. "Shall we?" Nora placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, her mind whirling with the implications of his words. Stay at Wildwood, forsake her journey to Sacramento. Give in to the feelings she'd been fighting since that first night. As they re-entered the warm, crowded church, Nora found herself unable to focus on the conversations around her. Her eyes kept straying to Colton as he good-naturedly judged 3 different apple pies, declaring a diplomatic tie between Mrs. Peterson and the mayor's sister. What would it mean to stay? To build a life here in this wild, beautiful place, with this man who had saved her from more than just the cold. The evening wound to a close around 2 in the morning. The sleigh ride home was quieter, with Martha dozing under her blankets and Colton respectfully silent beside Nora. Yet there was a new awareness between them, a tension that was not unpleasant but charged with possibility. When they reached Wildwood, Colton helped both women down from the sleigh. Martha immediately headed inside, muttering about her aching feet and the late hour. Nora made to follow, but Colton gently caught her arm. "Nora," he said softly, "I meant what I said earlier. Think about staying." In the moonlight, his face was open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. Without thinking, Nora raised her hand to his cheek, feeling the roughness of his evening stubble beneath her palm. "I will," she promised. Good night, Colton. Good night, Nora. That night, as she lay in bed, Nora's mind raced with possibilities. The cousin in Sacramento was little more than a name to her. Catherine had left the East when Nora was just a child, and they'd exchanged only occasional letters since. There was no guarantee of a welcome there, no promise of a home or work. Here at Wildwood, she had found not just shelter but purpose. Martha had become the mother figure she desperately needed. The ranch hands treated her like a sister. And Colton made her feel things she'd never expected to feel again after losing everything. But could she really build a new life here, so far from everything she'd known? And was she interpreting Colton's words correctly? Did staying mean as a permanent employee, or was he suggesting something more? Sleep eluded her as she turned these questions over in her mind. Dawn was breaking when she finally drifted off, no closer to an answer than when she'd begun. The next day brought an unexpected development. As Nora was helping Martha prepare dinner, a rider arrived at the ranch, a young boy from town, bearing a message for Colton. Martha sent Nora to deliver it to him in the barn where he was repairing a saddle. Colton looked up as she entered, his face brightening. "Nora, good morning." "Good morning," she replied, suddenly shy after their conversation the previous night. "A message came for you." She handed him the folded paper. He opened it, his expression growing serious as he read. "Interesting," he murmured. "Bad news?" Nora asked. Colton shook his head. "Not bad, just unexpected. The railroad's buying land for a new spur line. They're offering good money." He looked up at her. "Including for the parcel where I found you that night." Nora's breath caught. "That seems fitting somehow." "Indeed." Colton set the message aside. "About last night, Nora, you don't have to explain," she interrupted. "I understand that emotions run high at gatherings like that, and perhaps you spoke more freely than you intended." Colton frowned. "Is that what you think, that I didn't mean what I said?" I don't know what to think," Nora admitted. "It all seems so fast." "We've known each other only a few months." "Sometimes a few months is enough," Colton said, rising from his workbench to stand before her. "Sometimes a single moment is enough." "What moment?" Nora whispered. "The moment I saw you by those tracks," Colton replied without hesitation. "Something told me you were important, that finding you wasn't just chance." Nora's heart hammered in her chest. "I thought you were an angel," she confessed. "Or a dream. I was so cold, and you appeared like something from a storybook, offering warmth and safety when I'd given up on both." Colton took a step closer. "I'm no angel, Nora, just a man who knows what he wants." His voice dropped lower. "And what I want is for you to stay, not as my employee, but as more, much more in time." "Colton," Nora began, but whatever she might have said was interrupted by Martha's voice calling them for dinner. Colton sighed. "We'll continue this conversation later," he promised, offering her his arm. The meal was a quiet affair, with Martha doing most of the talking. Afterward, Colton announced he needed to ride into town to discuss the railroad's offer with the bank manager. He would be back for supper, he assured them. Once he was gone, Martha fixed Nora with a penetrating look. "So he finally spoke up, did he?" Nora nearly dropped the plate she was washing. "I beg your pardon," Martha chuckled. "Child, I've known Colton Reed since before he could walk. I know when he's smitten, and he's been smitten with you since the day he brought you here, half frozen and stubborn as a mule." That's not." Nora stammered. "It is," Martha contradicted gently. "And unless I'm very much mistaken, you feel the same way about him." Nora set the plate down carefully. "Even if that were true, I'm supposed to be leaving when spring comes. I have a cousin waiting for me." "Do you?" Martha asked shrewdly. "Or is that cousin just an excuse, a destination you cling to because you're afraid to build something new here?" The question hit too close to home. Nora turned away, busying herself with the dishes again. "It's not that simple, Martha." "Love rarely is," the older woman agreed. "But sometimes the most difficult choice is the right one." She patted Nora's shoulder. "Just think about it, dear. Really think about what you want, not what you think you should do." The rest of the day passed in a blur of chores and contemplation. By the time Colton returned from town, Nora was no closer to a decision than she had been that morning. Supper was a lively affair, with all the ranch hands joining them at the table. Diego regaled them with stories of his youth in Mexico, while Jasper described a near miss with a ornery bull that afternoon. Through it all, Nora was acutely aware of Colton at the head of the table, his eyes finding hers whenever conversation lulled. After the meal, the men returned to the bunkhouse, and Martha retired early, complaining of fatigue from the previous night's festivities. Nora and Colton found themselves alone in the parlor, the fire crackling between them. "The bank manager thinks the railroad's offer is fair," Colton said, breaking the silence. "Maybe more than fair." "That's good news," Nora replied, focusing on her mending. "It means expansion for the ranch," Colton continued. "More cattle, maybe some horses." "Diego's been after me to start breeding quarter horses for years." Nora looked up. "You're planning to stay here then, for the long term?" Colton met her gaze steadily. "This is my home, Nora. My father built it from nothing, and I intend to build it further. Leave something worthwhile behind someday," he paused. "I'd like that something to include a family." The implication hung in the air between them. "Colton," Nora began carefully, "I'm flattered, truly, but I'm not sure I'm ready for what you're suggesting." "I'm not asking for an immediate answer," he assured her. "Just the chance to court you properly, to show you what life could be like here with me." "And if I still choose to leave in spring?" Nora asked, needing to know. Colton's expression grew solemn. "Then I would wish you well and treasure the time we had together. I'm not in the business of keeping people where they don't want to be, Nora." His honesty touched her deeply. "I need time," she said finally, "to sort through my feelings." "Take all the time you need," Colton replied. "I'm not going anywhere." February gave way to March, and the first hints of spring began to appear at Wildwood. Snow melted, revealing patches of earth that had lain dormant through the long winter. Birds returned, their songs filling the mornings with promise. True to his word, Colton began to court Nora properly. Flowers appeared on her bedside table, early crocuses and snowdrops gathered from the meadows. He brought her books from his own collection, classics she had mentioned missing from her father's shop. On Sundays, they rode to church together, Colton proudly escorting her on his arm, oblivious to the whispers and speculative glances that followed them. In the evenings, they would sit in the parlor, sometimes with Martha, sometimes alone, talking of everything and nothing. Nora learned about Colton's childhood, his dreams for the ranch, his grief when his father died. In turn, she shared stories of her parents, the bookshop, the world of literature that had been her escape and education. One evening in late March, as they sat side by side on the porch watching the sunset, Colton reached for her hand. His touch was warm, solid, like the man himself. "Spring's almost here," he observed quietly. Nora nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "Yes. Have you decided?" The question was gentle, without pressure, but Nora could hear the hope beneath it. "I'm still thinking," she replied honestly. "Part of me feels I should continue to Sacramento, fulfill the plan I made, but another part," she looked at their joined hands. "Another part wonders if sometimes life takes you where you're meant to be, not where you thought you were going." Colton squeezed her hand. "For what it's worth, I believe you were meant to find your way here, to Wildwood." He paused. "To me." Nora's heart swelled with emotion. "Colton," the moment was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching rapidly. Colton stood, his posture alert as a rider galloped into the yard. It was Michael, the foreman, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss," he called. "Fire at the East Range, lightning strike from that storm brewing." Colton was instantly in motion. "Get the men, I'll saddle up." He turned to Nora. "Stay here with Martha, we'll be back when it's contained." Before she could respond, he was striding toward the barn, Michael close behind. Within minutes, the ranch hands were mounted and riding hard toward the eastern horizon, where a faint orange glow was now visible against the darkening sky. Nora stood on the porch long after they disappeared from view, a sense of foreboding settling over her. Martha joined her, her weathered face creased with worry. "Will they be all right?" Nora asked. Martha sighed. "Range fires are dangerous business, especially with the wind picking up, but Colton knows what he's doing, they all do." Despite Martha's reassurances, Nora found sleep impossible that night. She paced the parlor, jumping at every sound, hoping it was the men returning. Dawn broke with no sign of them, the eastern sky still smudged with smoke. It was mid-morning when they finally returned, exhausted and smoke-stained but triumphant. The fire had been contained before it could reach the main herd, though a few head of cattle had been lost and a section of fence destroyed. Nora rushed to meet them as they dismounted in the yard, her eyes seeking Colton. He looked haggard, his face blackened with soot, but he managed a tired smile when he saw her. "We got it," he said simply. Relief flooded through Nora, so intense it made her dizzy. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, heedless of the dirt and smoke that immediately transferred to her dress. "I was so worried," she admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. Colton's arms came around her, holding her close despite their audience. "I'm fine," he murmured into her hair. "We all are." When they separated, Nora was acutely aware of the ranch hands watching them, expressions ranging from amusement to approval. Martha stood on the porch, hands on her hips, a knowing smile on her face. "Bath and breakfast for all of you," the older woman announced. "You look like you've been wrestling with the devil himself." The men shuffled toward the bunkhouse, too tired to argue. Colton lingered, his eyes on Nora. "That was quite a welcome," he said softly. Nora felt her cheeks warm. "I was worried," she repeated lamely. "I like when you worry about me," Colton admitted. His hand reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, leaving a smudge of soot on her cheek. "It suggests you might care a little." "More than a little," Nora whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. The fatigue in Colton's eyes was replaced by something warmer, more intense. "Nora, bath," Martha interrupted firmly. "Then food, then you two can moon over each other all you want." Colton chuckled. "Yes, madam." He squeezed Nora's hand once before releasing it. "We'll talk later." As Nora watched him walk toward the house, her heart felt lighter than it had in months. The fear she'd experienced when he rode out to fight the fire, the relief when he returned safely, these weren't the emotions of someone planning to leave. These were the feelings of someone who had already found a home. Later that evening, after Colton had slept most of the day and eaten enough for 3 men, he found Nora in the garden behind the house. She was sitting on a bench beneath an apple tree that was just beginning to bud, a book open in her lap though she wasn't reading it. "May I join you?" Colton asked. Nora nodded, making room for him on the bench. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. "I've been thinking," Nora finally said. "About staying." Colton turned to face her, hope lighting his features. "And I think I'd like to," she said slowly. "Not just until spring, but longer, to see where this," she gestured between them, "might lead." The smile that broke across Colton's face was like sunrise after the longest night. "I was hoping you'd say that." But Nora continued, "I need to be useful, not just around the house, but in a way that uses my skills. My father taught me bookkeeping, business management. Perhaps I could help with the ranch accounts, or even, Colton prompted when she hesitated. "The town has no bookshop," Nora said, the idea forming as she spoke. "No library either from what I've seen. Maybe with time I could start something, a small shop or a lending library, bring some of my old world into this new one." Colton considered this. "The railroad spur will bring more people, more commerce. A bookshop might do well." He took her hand. "Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Your happiness matters to me, Nora." "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than I can say." Colton's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in their blue depths. Nora answered by leaning forward slightly, an invitation he didn't hesitate to accept. His lips were gentle against hers, the kiss sweet and tentative at first, then deepening as Nora responded. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing softly against her skin. When they finally parted, both were slightly breathless. "I've wanted to do that since the social," Colton admitted. "I've wanted you to," Nora confessed, feeling bold. Colton laughed, the sound rich with happiness. "Then we're in agreement." "It seems we are," Nora replied, smiling. They sat together until the stars fully emerged, talking of plans and possibilities. Nora would write to her cousin in Sacramento, explaining her change of plans. Colton would speak to the bank about the possibility of a small loan for Nora's bookshop venture. And in the meantime, they would continue to get to know each other, to build something that had begun that snowy night by the railroad tracks. As spring fully arrived at Wildwood, the ranch came alive with new growth and activity. Calves were born, fields were planted, and the days grew longer and warmer. Nora settled into her role as Colton's sweetheart, a designation that brought knowing smiles from the ranch hands and proud satisfaction from Martha. "I knew it from the start," the older woman claimed. "The way he looked at you, even that first night. Like he'd found something precious he hadn't known he was searching for." Nora blushed at such observations, but couldn't deny the truth in them. She had found something precious too, not just in Colton, but in the life she was building at Wildwood. Word arrived from Sacramento in late April, a letter from cousin Catherine expressing surprise at Nora's change of plans but wishing her well. "Love, when it finds you, should not be ignored," her cousin wrote. "I wish you every happiness with your Cowboy." The letter reinforced what Nora already knew in her heart. She had made the right choice. In May, Colton took Nora to town to look at possible locations for her bookshop. The railroad construction had begun, bringing new workers and increased business to the small community. They settled on a modest storefront near the church, with living quarters above that could serve as Nora's residence until other arrangements were made, as Colton delicately put it, his eyes conveying a promise for the future that made Nora's heart skip. The town welcomed the idea of a bookshop enthusiastically. Mrs. Peterson offered to supply baked goods for the opening. Dr. Morley promised to spread the word among his patients. Even the mayor expressed his approval, noting that a town with a bookshop is a town with culture. As they worked together to prepare the shop, painting walls, building shelves, ordering inventory from publishers back east, Nora and Colton grew closer still. Their courtship blossomed under the approving eyes of the community, their future together becoming more certain with each passing day. On a perfect June evening, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows around Wildwood and the air sweet with the scent of new growth, Colton asked Nora to ride with him to a special place. They set out after supper, following a trail that led east from the ranch. "Where are we going?" Nora asked, comfortable now on horseback after months of practice. "You'll see," Colton replied mysteriously. The trail wound through a stand of pines before opening onto a vista that took Nora's breath away. Below them lay a valley, lush with spring grass, a creek winding through it like a silver ribbon. The setting sun painted the scene in hues of gold and amber. "It's beautiful," Nora said softly. "My father brought my mother here when he asked her to marry him," Colton told her, dismounting and helping her down from her horse. "And his father before him did the same." Nora's heart began to race as she realized the significance of the moment. Colton took both her hands in his expression serious yet filled with tenderness. "Nora Blackwood," he began, "when I found you by those railroad tracks, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. You brought light back to Wildwood, purpose to my days, and love to a heart I thought might never feel it again." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner in all things. To build a life with me here, to fill our home with books and children and laughter." He reached into his pocket, producing a ring, a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it." Tears blurred Nora's vision as she looked down at this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Colton Reed, I will marry you." Joy transformed his features as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to pull her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a beginning, a confirmation of everything they'd built together since that winter night. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. "We should head back," Colton said reluctantly. "Martha will be waiting for news. She probably already knows," Nora replied with a smile. "That woman has an uncanny sense for these things." Sure enough, when they returned to the ranch, Martha was waiting on the porch, a knowing smile on her face. She burst into tears of happiness when they confirmed her suspicions, hugging them both tightly. "Nothing could make me happier," she declared, "except perhaps the patter of little feet around the place someday." "Martha," Nora exclaimed, blushing furiously. Colton laughed, wrapping an arm around his fiancée's waist. "All in good time, Martha, all in good time." The news of their engagement spread quickly through the county. Congratulations poured in, along with offers of help with wedding preparations. Mrs. Peterson immediately volunteered to bake the cake. The pastor's wife offered to organize the flowers. Even the ranch hands got involved, with Diego promising to have Colton's best horse groomed to perfection for the occasion. They set the date for August, giving them time to prepare properly and for Nora's bookshop to open its doors. The summer passed in a blur of activity, shelves being stocked, wedding clothes being sewn, a future being built together. Nora's bookshop and lending library opened in July to great acclaim. The small store, with its polished wood shelves and comfortable reading nooks, quickly became a gathering place for the town. Children came for story hour, women for the latest novels, men for newspapers and practical guides. Nora found herself busy from morning until night, but it was a fulfilling kind of busy, reminiscent of her days in her father's shop but infused with new purpose. Colton visited whenever he could, sometimes bringing her lunch, other times simply stopping by to steal a kiss between customers. He took evident pride in her success, boasting to anyone who would listen about his clever fiancée and her thriving business. Their wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the August sky a deep, unblemished blue. The ceremony was held at the church, decorated with wildflowers and ribbons for the occasion. Every seat was filled, the entire county turning out to witness the union of the respected rancher and the bookshop owner who had captured his heart. Nora wore a gown of ivory silk, Martha's skilled fingers having transformed one of Abigail's dresses into something uniquely suited to the bride. Colton waited at the altar in a new suit ordered specially from Denver, his face solemn until he caught sight of Nora walking down the aisle on Michael's arm. Then his expression transformed to one of such naked adoration that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, spoken clearly before God and their community. When the pastor pronounced them man and wife and Colton bent to kiss his bride, a cheer erupted that nearly lifted the church roof. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music and dancing, food and drink flowing freely. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit in the churchyard, casting a magical glow over the proceedings. Nora and Colton moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, their hands rarely separating. "Happy, Mrs. Reed," Colton murmured in her ear as they shared a quiet moment. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Nora replied truthfully. "And you, Mr. Reed?" "I have everything I could ever want," he answered, his gaze tender. "And it all began because you were sleeping beside the railroad tracks. Until the cowboy said you'll sleep somewhere warm," Nora finished with a smile. "And you will," Colton promised. "Every night for the rest of our lives." As the celebration wound down, the newlyweds slipped away to begin their life together. Colton had prepared a surprise, a honeymoon journey to Denver to visit his sister Abigail and her family, then on to St. Louis to purchase more books for the shop. It was a thoughtful gift, combining business with pleasure in a way that perfectly suited them both. Their first night as husband and wife was spent at Wildwood, in the master bedroom that had been freshly painted and furnished for their return. Martha had discreetly moved her belongings to the guest room that had once been Nora's, giving the couple privacy in their new beginning. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reed," Colton said softly as he carried her over the threshold. Nora's heart swelled with love as she looked at her husband, this good, steady man who had found her at her lowest moment and lifted her up. "I am home," she replied. "Wherever you are, that's my home now." Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons. The bookshop thrived, becoming not just a business but a cultural center for the growing town. The railroad spur was completed that fall, bringing increased commerce and visitors. Wildwood Ranch expanded, with new pastures cleared and the herd growing larger each year. And in the spring following their wedding, Nora shared joyful news with her husband they would be welcoming a child before the year's end. Colton's reaction was everything she could have hoped for, his joy uncontained as he swung her in a careful circle before setting her gently on her feet and kissing her with tender passion. "A family," he whispered against her lips. "Our family." Their daughter, Catherine Martha Reed, was born on a snowy December night, with Martha serving as midwife and Colton pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When he was finally allowed in to see his wife and child, the look of wonder on his face as he held his daughter for the first time was something Nora knew she would treasure forever. "She's perfect," he breathed, carefully tracing a finger along the baby's tiny cheek, just like her mother. As Catherine grew, so did the family's happiness. The bookshop continued to prosper, now featuring a special children's corner where the youngest Reed could often be found surrounded by picture books. Wildwood Ranch became known throughout the territory for its fine cattle and, thanks to Diego's influence, its quarter horses. 2 years after Catherine's birth, a son joined the family, James Colton Reed, named for both his grandfathers. The house rang with children's laughter, the sound of tiny feet on wooden floors, the joyful chaos of a home filled with love. On the 5th anniversary of the night Colton found Nora by the railroad tracks, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard under Martha's watchful eye. Colton's arm was around Nora's waist, holding her close against the February chill. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't ridden by that night?" he asked quietly. Nora shook her head. "I believe we were meant to find each other, if not that night, then somehow, somewhere." Colton pressed a kiss to her temple. "I think you're right. Some things are just meant to be." As they watched the sun set over Wildwood, casting long shadows across the land they both loved, Nora sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her to those railroad tracks on that winter night. For the cowboy who had found her there and offered warmth, safety, and eventually, love. For the life they had built together, rich with purpose and joy. She had once been a woman with nothing, sleeping beside railroad tracks in the bitter cold. Now she was Nora Reed, wife, mother, bookshop owner, beloved by her community. All because a cowboy had looked at her with compassion and said those life-changing words, "You'll sleep somewhere warm tonight," and she had, every night since.